Between Wednesdays, just trying to get by to the next fix. Living between Wednesdays, prefer the comics over the Netflix.
What's up, folks? I'm your host Konrad on Wednesday Night Reviews, and I'm joined today by Rey Garza, who's the author of Tank McGreggor and the Mechanical Menace. Ray, thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey man, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, I'm doing good, and yeah, we're happy to have you. So for the people out there in YouTube land who maybe have never heard of your name, seen your face, or heard of your book, who is Rey Garza?
Well, I can almost guarantee you that people in YouTube land have not seen my face or heard my name. Who is Rey Garza? Man, I was telling you this earlier. You like start off with the hard questions. I've been trying to figure that out for 30 years, man. No, man, like, I'm just a huge geek, video game nerd, movie lover, lover of everything pop culture. The other day, my sister told me that out of all of our siblings, I'm the only one that I never grew up. So I'm like, okay, good to know. So I don't know, man. I just always been into like pop culture and comedy. I mean, cartoons, things like that, comic books, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. You know what? My truth be told, a saying I have between myself and my partner is oftentimes, especially when I do something stupid or I nerd out on something, I might turn to her, she might turn to me, and the line of "I'm actually just 12" will come out somehow. And I truly believe that. I still think I'm the 12-year-old kid. My body's just gotten a lot bigger.
Yeah, man, it's so weird, like seeing like, okay, so my older sister is like a doctor and my younger brother just recently became a lawyer, and I'm here like in the middle, like, still like drawing and like trying to make my little short films and stuff like that, so it's definitely weird.
Yep.
But hey, man, I wasn't gonna be a doctor or a lawyer, so I'm happy where I am.
Perfect. Well, that's good to hear. So you know what? We're here to talk today about Tank McGreggor and the Mechanical Menace. So I'll put a nice picture up here for the folks to see it. But what the heck is Tank McGreggor and the Mechanical Menace?
It is the first in the Tank McGreggor series of comic books. Series because I plan to have more than one. But this is the first one that I have completed. And it really was a passion project for the longest time. It was about 3 or 4 years in the making. I wrote and I illustrated it all myself. It's a science fiction action comedy, very violent. It's based on like the movies of the 80s and 90s that I used to watch as a kid. And I insert a lot of humor in there, which is like my own sense of humor that I just kind of like it tends to flow out into my work. So it doesn't take itself too seriously. But at the same time, it's got these like, I try to make them like high sci-fi concepts, like transhumanism and like, I mean, one of my biggest, I'm one of the biggest fans of like Dune and things like that. I really like some like high sci-fi. So I try to insert that kind of stuff into the book, but at the same time, it's very cartoony, very Looney Tunesy. Yeah. So it's like my wife called it Futurama meets Dune. So I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good description, I think.
Okay, I like that actually. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And actually, I did want to touch on it because you mentioned, so you've written and illustrated the whole book yourself. Excuse me. The book is in total about 129 pages. And then your colorist is Michael Woods, and then your editor is Brutally Honest Jerks, which I think is fantastic. So you know what a fun question is, because this is not just like a 24-page comic book. Like it's a hefty little book there. How long have you been working on it? Oh, nice, we've got it in print. I love it.
In print, yeah, exactly. How long have I been working on it? I honestly don't remember the exact date when it started. I remember what happened. Like, was I just had this day where I was feeling particularly creative, or I don't know what it was, but I just sat down and I wrote a 15-page script. And it wasn't meant to be a comic book, and it wasn't meant to be anything really. My background is in film, so I used to write a lot of scripts and short scripts. So it was formatted like a short film script, but it was never meant to be that anyway, because it was so fantastical, you know? And most of it was not action. Well, most of it was dialogue. I just had a whole bunch of dialogue.
Okay.
You've read it, or you've read some of it, so you'll know in the beginning of the book, it starts off with a narration, a somewhat like long narration about like where we are in outer space, and it's just like this gaseous nebula talking at you. And that's the first thing I ever wrote. It just sort of like, I just started writing like the most nonsensical thing I could think of.
Nice.
And before I knew it, I had this like 15-page, I guess you would call it an outline. And I just left it there. I didn't do anything with it for the longest time. And it must have been like about a year and a half later where I just sort of started putting pen to paper and sort of drawing, because again, I didn't have like a set, I didn't have storyboards or anything. I just started drawing what I saw in my head based on the dialogue that I had written a year prior, you know. And I would just do that for fun as a hobby. Whenever I felt down in my luck or anything, I would just go back to drawing. Whenever I was bored, I would go back to drawing. And little by little, it just became this thing where suddenly I have 120 pages of a comic book. So I thought, might as well ink it now. So then I started inking it, and I had this then ink comic book. And thought, might as well get it colored. So I contacted Michael Woods, and he did an incredible job coloring the whole book. He really like brought life to it. And now I don't know if I can ever see the book without color, you know, after seeing his colors, obviously. It's so rich and so, it just fit perfectly for it. And then once I had that colored, I was like, I might as well get it printed, you know, like it all happened very like moment through moment. It was never this master plan of like having a comic book, you know. Yeah. Naturally, that makes it sound like I just kind of like did it willy-nilly, but no, I did put a lot of effort and time into it, you know, and I would read through it like 1,000 times and then say like, this is not working here. You got to move this over there. Like I need a new chapter here, you know, and I just kind of like constructed it from within. So that 15 pages outline became a 120-page book, you know? Wow. Yeah. So in total, to answer your question, it was like about 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's actually interesting. So I didn't expect you to say that you'd actually analog inked and drawn it. Because like the colors in the book are very rich. I'm assuming it was colored on digital because it very much looks digital. But that's fascinating. So I'm wondering sort of, and maybe I guess Michael would be the better person to ask this question, but I'm wondering how the colors were done because of having inked and drawn it analog. Like, did you just do like high risk scans and send them to Michael and have him?
Oh no, I actually digitally drew it.
Okay, so it is digitally drawn. Okay.
Yeah. Although that being said, I did probably give Michael a lot more trouble than he needed because, again, like I wasn't planning on coloring it. I didn't know how to make comics at the time. So when I would like send him the pages, I would send him like pages with the word bubbles in it.
Oh no! Okay.
Everything just put on there. I'm like, here, color it. And he's like, hey, do you have these in layers? And I was like, no. And he's like, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. And then like at one point I have a holographic character in the book. Yeah. And that holographic character was the only thing in the entire book that I actually did in color. So the whole book was black and white inks, but like for some reason that character I actually did it in blue. And he's like, hey, do you have versions of this where she's not in blue? Like, and I'm like, no. And he's like, okay, it's fine, don't worry about it. So I was just like, oh man, I'm putting like, he's gonna like want to charge me so much more or something. I don't know.
I mean, you know what?
Yeah, I obviously learned a lot now.
Yeah, I was saying, you know, now for next time when you give Michael the next one. That's amazing.
Well, Michael and I are actually working. We're more than halfway through the second one now.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. I'm not going to talk about that too much, but it's called Cosmic Colossus, and it's the effective sequel to Mechanical Menace.
Okay.
Mechanical Menace ends on like it's pretty self-contained. So what really continues is just like the journey of the Tank McGreggor character as a person. The story begins and ends in Mechanical Menace, and this is a brand new adventure. But yeah, so I started drawing that one, and this time everything's nice and in layers. and nicely formatted and give it to him, and he's like, thank you, very polite.
Awesome. Then you know what? Maybe this is getting a bit too far ahead of ourselves there. So you've mentioned you're already halfway through a second one. Is the intent for each of them to be sort of self-contained, like a lot of artists or a lot of crime writers, for instance, come to mind who write, a single self-contained story, but they'll have the same character for a whole series? Is that sort of the intent, maybe?
Yes. So it is uh, intended that way. I'm structuring it in a way that every book could have a different adventure, and the only thing that's consistent is Tank McGreggor and his partner Jensen. And whereas the adventures all begin and end within the single books, him as a character, he goes through some sort of journey throughout it, and he develops as a person, as a character, So
Yeah.
he has an arc, and I explain a little bit more about their backstory. So if you want to know, like, really deep lore about it, I guess you have to read them all. But really, you don't need to have read them all to like enjoy one or the other. You can pick up book 2 and enjoy it, book 3 and enjoy it.
Yeah.
Without or two. It's sort of my main like inspiration for doing it that way is, I don't know how familiar you are with like Mad Max and the whole Mad Max series. So Max has a different adventure in each movie, but he's the same character, But it's the people around him that have the stories and the arcs and the adventures, and he's sort of just like this, not passive bystander, but he's unwitting bystander, in these adventures. And that's sort of like what he is to me. He's sort of like a Mad Max type character.
Yeah, I have to agree. For me, actually, a lot of it, when I was reading it, like you said earlier, it definitely is referential to sort of the 80s sort of films and things like that. I imagine personally Bruce Willis's face under there, under his mask, just because that's the kind of dialogues you had were very like very 80s. That's the only way I could say that.
No, yeah.
And
100%.
for me, something about Bruce Willis is the 80s. So that's whose face is under that mask to me. I did want to ask then, so Tank McGregor is going to be this sort of journey, or rather this character we follow through many journeys. In this particular one, when we pick him up, he's basically a mercenary or a bounty hunter. Can you tell us more about Tank McGregor, the person?
Yeah, he's sort of like this down on his luck bounty hunter, I mean, there's not a lot of work happening. When he does get a job, it sort of gets all the funds and spoils of the job get sort of like dispersed in all these like bureaucratic things that he's got to like pay for the damages that he did, and like he's got to pay for gift baskets to send like the wrongfully people that he accused first, like he's got to do all these things. So like at the end of it, he's got no money. So it's like, oh, well, I guess we got to just go to the next job now. And while that's not a major part of the book, it does sort of start out that way. He's a borderline alcoholic. He's got nothing else to do but drink around in his ship all day. He's very easily gets depressed, but the only thing but his job sort of like gets him back up here in this mood. So he's got to be constantly working, or he like sort of spirals out into this like sadness, I suppose. Makes it sound like the book. Makes it sound like the book like gets really depressing, but it doesn't. I swear it's fun.
Yeah, like
but,
I think for me, like you said, it is very fun, and there's a lot of humor to it. And again, I'll put up some of the first couple pages after the monologue where we see Tank. But I absolutely love the interaction we get with what's the species of alien here? Is this big lizard-looking dude, and he has some goons. Yeah, and he's selling some drugs, some fisk, and he gets, Tank McGregor comes after him, and he gets attacked, and one of the characters that attacks him is like this mass of fat or a blob, or he's some sort of round, fat little character.
Yeah.
And when Tank dispatches this character, his line is, "Show me your blam blam face," and then the next panel is this character getting shot, and blam 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 appears. I think it is absolutely some hilarious comic comics comedy, but you've also just got a ton of really fun 80s one-liners and sort of self-referential and deprecative humor when it comes to McGregor and his circumstance. So it really makes the character a lot of fun. How did you come up with that? What inspired that? Because you could have made him just like this 80s badass macho, like, you know, shoot first, ask questions later kind of guy, but you made him a self-doubting, alcoholic, down on his luck, funny person to be around or to read about.
Well, those are the most interesting characters, right? The ones that have a lot of like flaws and are, I mean, I tend to be very self-deprecating myself. So a lot of it is just bleeding through my own personality, bleeding through the page. But I mean, I love movies, and I grew up watching the action movies of the 80s and the 90s. I'm still watching action movies, although, you know, they don't hold a candle to the old stuff. And I love those movies, and I love the characters in those movies, the Van Dammes, the Schwarzeneggers, the Bruce Willises, the Michael Dudikoffs, Michael Beans, all those guys. But at the same time, as much as I love them, I do recognize them, especially now as an adult, how ridiculous they were. So I can't, in all consciousness, do a character like this and do it in a straight face. You know, I sort of like take the piss out of it, and that's why I make it so self-referential, and I try to make sure that every time I did like an 80s one-liner, like you put it, I sort of made it different and something that really doesn't make sense, and a line that everybody else sort of like looks and goes like, what are you talking about? And they just like end the scene there, you know, like I think that's really funny. So yeah, I'm not sure, like it wasn't like a conscious effort either to like bring like, oh, that kind of humor into it. It's just the kind of shit that would make me laugh. And the kind of stuff that makes my brother laugh, you know, if I'm writing and I think this will make my brother laugh, I think it's a good avenue to go through, you know? That's why I show him my work, and I sort of like, he hates it when I do this, but like, I sort of like watch him. Like, and I'm like, and he can like, where you like laugh and where you don't laugh. And he's like, don't look at me while I'm reading. But if he laughs, I'm like, all right, that was good. If he doesn't laugh, I'm like, why didn't you laugh? Like, what's going on? And I'll be like, all right, tell me. You know?
Yeah. Perfect.
But yeah, it just sort of naturally.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you know what? You probably cannot get a better content editor than something like that, because that's perfect.
Well, the Brutally Honest Jerks is just an amalgamation of people that I asked and friends, like, hey, what do you think of this? And like, it doesn't work. It's not a company. It genuinely is a bunch of jerks that I asked.
Amazing. Okay, please never stop doing that and never stop putting it like that, because that's amazing. I thought maybe it was like a company or something like that you'd worked with that just called themselves that.
Yeah, no, that was literally like my brother, my friend Andre, kind of my wife a little bit, although I wouldn't call her a jerk, you know, but like it's sort of like a little inside joke for when they get the book and they read it. They know that they're the ones that I asked, like, hey, could you give me some notes on this? So they'll see that like, oh, okay, thanks. Because they were all brutally honest, and I asked for the brutal honesty, really. I mean, maybe not brutal. I don't welcome brutal honesty, but I like their honesty.
Yeah. Like, if it's not good, you want to know, and don't be nice about it.
Exactly. And I'm the worst to receive critique. Like, if you tell me, if I ask you, like, oh, give me your honest opinion, and you give me like a critique, my immediate like reaction will be like, you don't know what you're talking about, you know, and I'll get all like defensive. But then like I'll let it rest for like a day, and I'm like, nah, this person's got a point, and then I'll make changes. You know,
I absolutely gotta commend you then, Ray, on how well you know yourself, because a lot of people don't know themselves that well, and the fact that you do, I think, helps make this book as funny as it is. Because yeah, a lot of that comes through. Like, talking to you now, I can see, like, it makes sense. It clicks. It's like, oh yeah, no, these things fit. It's really cool. I did want to ask then, so is Tank McGregor here, or Tank McGregor and the Mechanical Menace, is this your first comic that you've done and published?
Yes. It is the first one that I've done and published. It's the first one that I've done and completed, I would say, as well. I mean, I never took comic book writing or illustrating as an avenue that I would eventually pursue until more recently. But yeah, like it goes back to when I was younger, like 10 years old or whatever, and I was making like the Phantom meets Spider-Man, you know, and just kind of like, here, now they do this, and now they have a magical ring, and just kind of like throw shit in there, you know. Yep. So beyond that, I had never really completed a comic book before. And this is the first one that I actually made. And I was fortunate enough to grab the attention of a lesser known comics, Mark Granal over at Lesser Known Comics. He saw it and he's like, hey, let's like do something with this. And now it's getting published through them, which I'm super thankful for. And it's been a really cool, fun journey and a learning experience as well. Like all these things, I'll be in like meetings with lesser known comics sometimes. And they'll be talking about certain things like, oh yeah, we got to get the so-and-so into this and that. And I'm like, I don't know what any of these things mean. I got to ask somebody. I got to Google them afterwards or whatever.
Yep. That's cool. So I appreciate you gave us the backstory on, you know, over a period of a couple of years, you might turn to it, work on it right here, right there, draw this, draw that, and then get it off to get colored. Why comics? What is it about comics that appealed to you? Because you could have gone into a film or a clay animation or 10,000 other creative avenues. What was it about comics that kind of got you?
Well, it's funny you mentioned film and clay because I started out. I mean, like I think at heart, I want to tell stories, and I want to. It doesn't matter the medium. You know, I'll tell puppet theater if I had the resources and the patience, you know. But when I was younger, I would make claymation for my family, and I would just make little claymation animations, and I would do them a lot. Actually, I did a lot of them. I guess I had a lot of free time, and that evolved into a love for filmmaking and cinema. So I actually started doing short films. And then that led to me going to film school over at UT in Austin, Texas, and pursuing that career. And I did a feature film and I did a few short films in my film career. And I've worked in several films and I've done a lot of that. And it got to a point where it started getting a lot harder to like get a project off the ground, especially having a day job and like just not enough time. Every time I wrote something, I would be like, all right, this is cool, but is it good enough to dedicate like a year of my life and make a movie out of it? You know, it was a struggle to then find something that like I grew passionate about. So I had all these stories and all these scripts and all these like creative things that I want to get out. But like I said, it became harder and harder to get the people together and like fund a film and all that stuff. One of the things that I've always been proud of myself is that I can draw. And I have a certain style that I'm pretty proud of. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm self-sufficient when it comes to drawing. I don't need to get a hold of X person or Y person. I'm just going to start doing it. So comics just became the most reasonable next step, you know, like to tell my stories, to sort of like put what I saw in my head as movies into comics, you know. Obviously, there's some translation that happens because I mean, comics and movies are just inherently different, but I wanted to try to do that. I wanted to try to bring what I love about movies into comic books and apply those formulas and those paradigms into the written page, into the drawn page, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned it that way because one thing I've enjoyed, so me being Canadian and typically I like to try and, you know, read every, you know, support local and reach out and read Canadian artists. One of the artists who I do highly enjoy is Francis Manipul, who's worked on, well, a lot now, but when I was most into his art, he was in Batman, or he was on Batman. He happens to be from where I'm from, or Toronto. Cool. And he's got on his YouTube channel some really cool videos, but one of them is all about framing comics, and he does it entirely from a perspective of film. Because when he talks about how to set up the panels for your comics, how you're going to make your comic page flow visually and look good, as well as the content in them to look good, he basically is just like, you're basically just making a storyboard for a movie. So think of how you'd want your movie scene to play out, and then make what's important your frames. So it's always fun for me when I hear someone like yourself talk about I do film, I've made scripts, because maybe your brain thinks that same way. So is there anything that,
Absolutely.
yeah, so when it comes to your book, then I guess a cute question would be, are there any panels in your comic that maybe you hit a scene in a movie and you were like, I like this scene or this specific look, and you went, let me put that in a panel in my book? Is there anything that sort of clicked like that, or that you wanted to reference?
Not not really where I like did it consciously. Probably maybe unconsciously I did, but I mean, it was more like just the way I would frame a movie or a scene. That's what drove the panels, and sometimes to their detriment, because sometimes it'd just be like, oh, uh, shot, reverse shot, and I'm like, all right, it works for a movie. On the page, it's looking kind of boring. I have to like mix it up. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I had to get myself out of that like mentality and sort of adapt it to the page. But yeah, no, I don't remember like thinking of like, I mean, there's a lot of Blade Runner in it. It was more like subconscious inspiration for story and themes and the feel of it, as opposed to actual like framing of a panel trying to mimic a movie, you know. So no, I didn't really try to copy a specific frame from a movie, but I can think of like different ideas and stuff that I got straight from like Dune or Blade Runner. Obviously Mad Max, you know, a lot of it is in a desert setting, you know, a desert planet. So yeah, now I'm blanking out on the panels, man. I gotta look through the book.
No worries, no worries.
A lot of it is though. A lot of it is more than movies though. It was based a lot of Mike Mignola's work on Hellboy.
Oh, love it.
So like a lot of the way that like the cover itself is just not a ripoff, mind you, but like it is based off directly off of Mike Mignola, like Hellboy, just straight up and like in a sort of towering figure and like a cool background, you know, that kind of stuff. So I based myself a lot on that. Whenever I was in doubt, whenever I was like, well, I don't really know how to draw smoke and make it look good. How does Mike Mignola do it? Oh, he just does like a very simple way of doing it. It looks awesome. I would just do that, you know? So I borrow this from that, and sort of like by doing that, Frankenstein my own way of drawing and my own style, and something new was born.
Perfect. Well, you know what I've heard a lot too is, specifically, actually, I think it's a quote from Jim Lee, who was saying a lot of the people when he was starting it were really impressed with his work, because of the level of high detail he was doing, and he was like, all I was doing was just Jim Lee drawing X artist, and it was whoever he was most inspired by. So honestly, I think the way that you're doing it, the best way, you're taking the best things that you like out of your favorite artist or the artist you admire, and you're adapting it.
Right.
Perfect way to do it. Perfect way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would love to be able to draw like Jim Lee or even Todd McFarlane, but it's like, oof. Like those guys, I don't know how they do it.
Lot of practice. Lot of practice.
Exactly.
But you know what?
Really.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned earlier you have a style, and I agree. It looking at your work now, like it feels like a little bit maybe of almost say the look of Rick and Morty, but more detailed, more gritty. And yeah, like it's something that I enjoy so much about comics is every single person draws different. And if an artist draws, if I can say this guy draws like this guy, that first guy I mentioned, he's not a good artist because he's just copying. It's not interesting. So maybe don't try and draw like them, but definitely own your craft, right? Because this book looks fantastic.
It's funny because I have gotten Rick and Morty before. That's not something I ever strive for, but more than one occasion I've been told like, oh, this is kind of Rick and Morty-ish, not just in the drawings, but like in the content as well. And I'm like, oh, that is the biggest compliment because I think Rick and Morty is like up here, you know?
Well, it's definitely a smart book. And as you mentioned earlier, you touch on things like transhumanism, especially with the robot that McGregor ends up pursuing. So I did want to sort of touch on, I know that you mentioned earlier Dune, Blade Runner, those are kind of some of the inspirations. When it came to you developing the story and what you put McGregor through here, was there anything in, maybe that's not the best way to ask the question, what made you want to explore the themes that you did in this story?
They're just things that fascinate me, really. And I guess writing about them is just a way of sort of not dealing with them myself. I mean, I do think he goes through a lot of, like I mentioned earlier, he goes through a lot of like depression sometimes and sadness. I wouldn't say that I go through a lot of depression, but I mean, obviously we all have our ups and lows, you know?
Yeah.
The things like the transhumanism and the embodying bodies that are not your own and things like that. I mean, it's all, again, things that kind of fascinate me and I've read up on. I don't mean to like say that I know much or even relate anything to people of the transgender people and people who are going through that kind of stuff. But yeah, I have read up on it and it does fascinate me. And in a way, I wanted to not write about that, but write about the idea of like embodying someone, but feeling a different way, you know, and like trying to live in someone else's skin and like being where you belong and being where you know you don't belong and trying to get out of there, you know.
Yeah.
I myself also like I fear change. I say that a lot, but I really do fear change a lot, where it's like anything in the house, like curtains change. I don't want to change anything. My wife hates that for me, but it's just the truth. So like, I guess in a way, this book has a lot to do with change as well, you know?
Oh yeah.
So I explore that, you know, even if it's subconsciously, it just happens to the story and the themes. So it's just things that either I'm going through or that are fascinating me on the moment, or that it's just an idea that I've had for a long time and you just can't get out of your head. You know, sometimes you have an idea and within a month you're over it, you know, and you don't like it anymore.
Yeah.
But when something sticks with you, you have to do something, and that's what you got to do, is put it on paper.
I like it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's how that came about, really.
I love it. Like I found really interesting is and what it made me think of. So when the scene comes across sort of later in the book, the, I don't want to call her an antagonist, but the mechanical menace that McGregor ends up pursuing, she herself runs into a pack of robots, and they're all talking about trying to blend in with humanity and whether or not they should. And
Right.
one specific line that sort of clicked in my brain was they were mentioning, oh, my pain receptors have been off for forever. And that really, for me, it clicked because I'm a huge fan of Ghost in the Shell. And the whole can of worms of a conversation that you can bring up with that film and the TV shows and the manga regarding sort of taking that different perspective, where if you really view your body as just a tool and if your mind is a separate entity, how you can feel about your body being a little detached from it or a little cold towards your body.
Yeah.
But also then you can make the argument specifically within Jensen, actually, because I've just got Jensen on my screen here, where in order to make McGregor happy, I don't know the word to use, to make their relationship better, Jensen likes to wear wigs, for instance, which I thought was really funny and smart, but also, given what Jensen is inherently, like this floating orb, it's a computer, it wanting to have some sort of human look to it to make us comfortable, I found that really interesting, right? Because it would be easy to make like a cut and dry floating Jarvis to be like, I'm a robot and I'm analyzing, but you've really done a good job of humanizing Jensen in particular. It's kind of cool. And now I like the idea of the conversation for that.
And I won't go too much into like where the story takes Jensen and Tank in like book 2 or 3 so much, but there's definitely more to their backstory than meets the eye. Jensen, there is a reason why it's trying to put on wigs and hey, remember when we used to do this? Remember when we used to have fun over here? You know, and it's hard for him to see him in the wigs because it reminds him of their past, you know, which is like what could that past have been?
Yeah.
I get into that later. But yeah, and going back to the theme of change, for a lot of the book, Jensen keeps going back like, hey, you know, maybe I could have a body, you know, at some point instead of just being a floating orb. I can do more for us if I had a body. And Tank doesn't want to do that because A, it's expensive again, and B, you know, he doesn't know if he can deal with like suddenly that the change. He doesn't know if he can deal with suddenly having a robot walking around, you know. But Jensen is definitely Tank's rock, and yeah, Jensen is the only thing that I would say would make Tank happy. Just having him around, and it would be the worst thing in the world if Jensen wasn't around. He needs to have Jensen around.
Absolutely. It's cool because often I think it kind of plays on that trope of like a man and his dog, right? Often though within that, if it's especially when it's just a dog, because you know I love dogs, oh my god, but dogs don't talk to you. Dogs don't have discussions with you, right? Like they're very base emotive animals, right? I've seen a happy dog, I've seen a sad dog, and dogs can react to you, but they're very it's low level, right? It's let's work on emotions, and they make you happy, and we all love dogs. Well, most people. What I like about Jensen is it would be easy to treat Jensen as a pet, a dog, a tool, whatever, but you've made Jensen a very human character, and it's fascinating, and I'm genuinely excited to see where you take it. Because there's definitely, there's a lot of strings that you've set up to be able to explore in further books about their past, where their relationship goes, how they deal with each other, and it's fascinating. And I really don't want to get into spoiler territory.
Yeah, I know, right? No, but yeah, definitely. And it was one of the bigger surprises of when I started showing the book to people, was that people wanted to know more about Jensens past and who he was to Tank.
Yeah.
And that's not something that I set off to do at the beginning. It was just a couple of lines here and there that I knew what the past was, but I never intended to like go any deeper. But people kept going like, oh, I want to know more about this. And that's when I realized, oh, wow, I inadvertently created this like deep relationship with these two. And it'd be terrible not to explore that further. You know, that's what the book is, those relationships, you know?
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Bear with me. We've covered so much that I didn't expect to cover, and it's so nice.
I could talk about this forever, dude.
Perfect. Let me see. From what I wanted to touch on, we've kind of plowed through, which is great. Oh, important question. Very important thing for people to know. How can folks get their hands on Tank McGreggor and the Mechanical Menace?
Well, funny you ask. Tank McGreggor and the Mechanical Menace is about to be launched through Lesser Known Comics Batch 4 Kickstarter happening on May 10th. The current plan is to make it happen May 10th. And I provided a link below. You can click on that and just follow it to get notified when that launches. It's going to launch as part of their... they release these sort of, they call them batches. So like you won't get just one book. Tank McGreggor is serving as the tent pole for this Kickstarter, but you also have the chance to get 2 other great books from Lesser Known Comics, and you could also go into and catch up on the rest of Lesser Known Comics catalog. They have a lot of great stories and a lot of great books that you can find there, and you can go on the website and read them digitally for free or purchase them if you want for a price. But yeah, so you can click that link and get led straight to where you can find the book.
Perfect. And I always like to ask, because in Kickstarter, there's a lot of different variety in what you can get. I'm assuming there's going to be that the classic $1 support to support kind of level or tier. What do you know? Because I appreciate maybe you don't have a big control of how Lesser Known Comics as a company sets up their Kickstarter. But do you know of the different levels or tiers that will be involved in the Kickstarter?
In terms of prices, no, I don't. I know it was there was discussions, and in fact, I think it was emailed earlier today, but I didn't off the top of my head know what the tiers will be. But yeah, there will be the typical like $1, $5 support kind of thing. If you want just the digital book, it's this much. If you want the physical book by itself, it's like $50 or something like that. And then if you want it along with the other two books, it's going to be a little bit more, you know. So it's like your typical. It's not going to be like anything crazy.
Okay, so people will be able to go out, and if they want to get just the digital copies, basically,
Yeah,
easy peasy. Probably the lesser of the three cost wise, and then you'll have one where you can get Tank McGreggor, and then one for the whole batch. Okay.
I believe so. Yes. And if Mark Burnell sees this and he's like, "That is completely wrong," then I'm sorry.
Well, the link is down below. It'll be out
Yeah.
by the time people can see this, so they can go click the link down below now. They can check out all the tiers. They can pick the one that works for them.
Well, mainly I wanted to know that they can find me on Instagram. They can find my work at Tank McGreggor Comic on Instagram. That's Tank McGreggor with 2 G's in the McGregor. Because apparently there's very popular McGregor last name with just 1 G, like Conor McGregor, and I didn't know that when I wrote the name. So you might get some like, it's funny, like when you Google Tank McGregor, you get a lot of like tank tops for Conor McGregor. So it's like, I should have thought of that more. Yeah, but like, yeah, no, so Instagram, you know, you can see a lot of my art there. You can follow me there, and you follow me on the Tank McGregor Comic Instagram. Then you can, from there, see my personal Instagram, where you see a lot of pictures of me and my dog and my wife and some of my art. But yeah, that's mainly what I'd like people to know. They could follow me and kind of keep up with me, and you can reach out to me. I will always answer whatever you want, any question. You want to talk movies, games, anything, I'm down. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Yeah. Collector problems, cliffhangers, mysteries. You need answers. When did Batman become Green Lantern? I get it. True believer, not lying. Always up for an awesome summer crossover tie-in.